Day live for September 14th. I'm your host, David Michalek. With me today, again, is America's #1 credit expert, John Ulzheimer, formerly with FICO and Equifax. It's always a lot of fun doing this, John, because, I had this guy, I was just thinking about this earlier today. I had a guy post, this was about a week ago or so, maybe 2 weeks ago, on one of our lives, and he was just asking, the typical crazy questions that credit repair people ask. And he goes, well, why don't you have this person on? He names his name. He goes, this guy's a credit guru. I'm like, I've never heard of him. I'm not saying I know everybody in the space, but it's a really, really small group, and we kind of all know each other. And rather than say something like, well, apart from him, who else thinks he's a guru?
Send me the name. Send me the name offline, and I'll see if I know anything about.
Yeah,
the person to be named later.
Right. Well, I couldn't find anything. I literally did a very cursory job at trying to find this guy, and I didn't find anything. But the point I was going to make is, why would I do that? I mean, if I've got people that worked at the bureaus or worked at or are attorneys or have some kind of connection to the industry, I mean, everybody out there is pitching a book or. I'm not going to name any names either, but that one guy that walking around at Credit Con is America's #1 credit specialist, and I'm like, never heard of you before that seminar.
I know who you're talking about.
I know you do because I was sitting next to you when he walked by. But Louis, hello and welcome. Okay, I see we got some people jumping on board. Okay, so the way it'll go today is just like it does every week. John and I are going to talk about a subject or two that we've got on our mind, but we're here to answer questions, so it doesn't have to be related to what we're talking about. So if you got something on your mind, anything about credit scores, how credit works, if you got a unique experience, you need a deeper dive into it, that's what we're here for. Again, like always, the one subject we don't really delve into on this live with John is we don't really talk about credit repair tactics. But if you do have that kind of a post, maybe I'll swing back around and answer it a little bit later on. So, John, what I want to talk about today is a fascinating. You and I already talked about this briefly because I sent you an email about it. But one of the great things about Crediversio is it has a really cool understanding of what it's looking at on a credit report. So one day we get this account that we'd never seen before. It looked like something we'd seen, but it came up flagged. And my partner, David, who sits across from me, says, hey, check this out. This is typically what a Experian Boost self-reported account looks like. Because there's certain account information that is just a dead ringer. Like, we know what it is. But it was rental reporting. So he and I are both looking at it going, this is rental reporting on Experian Boost. And he and I'm like Googling it and going on Experian Boost. I'm like, I haven't heard anything about it. So the first thing I did, of course, is send it over to you, and you're like, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But our system could definitely tell it looks exactly like Experian Boost self-reported accounts. So it wasn't too much longer after that you sent me the article it wasn't from Experian, but it was about Experian going into beta on reporting rental data. So I thought we would talk about that a little bit, especially how it affects FICO 8, which interestingly enough doesn't really respond to any kind of rental reporting, from what I understand.
Yeah, what I sent you was the Experian press release. In fact, when I went over to them a few weeks ago and asked them if they were allowing rent to be furnished through Boost, they came back and said, no, we don't. We have a rent bureau, which is part of Experian, and the rent bureau trade lines are furnished and they show up as rent, but not through Boost. I mean, clearly they knew, and they weren't ready to announce anything yet. So then a couple weeks later, they sent me that press release regarding the beta going live that day, where consumers who pay their rent through their checking account or they're directly through the bank account, which I suppose most people do, one way or the other, you can now option that into the Experian database through Boost. And I don't understand. I don't pretend to be a PR person, but I think that I can't imagine that someone at Experian didn't say, hey, y'all know that FICO 8 doesn't consider Boost, and we have all these statistics
Yeah.
in this press release about FICO 8 and, excuse me, let me rephrase it. FICO 8 doesn't consider rent. And y'all have all these statistics in the press release about how adding rent through Boost is going to help your FICO 8 score. And, maybe we should think about how we're going to respond to messages from people who notice that.
Right.
Well, and so I, in all fairness to them, I reached out to them and asked them, hey, are y'all, and I actually have the, every time FICO releases a new model, they actually they don't publish the technical specs, obviously, but they do publish what I call a marketing glossy, which is essentially a multi-page document that goes over the characteristics of the new model and
Yeah.
compares it to the prior versions, and then gives you some statistics about performance and how it's better than the other ones, and answers some FAQs about scoring systems. So I actually went back and looked at the FICO 8 product release information, and then looked at the FICO 9 product release information. And in the FICO 9 product release information, actually, that was part of the what's new in FICO 9 section. And it was, hey, we're going to consider rent now. So it was pretty obvious that we had this disconnect between the Experian press release and then FICO 9 being the first generation of FICO to consider rental trade line. So I actually reached out to both companies. I never heard back from FICO. I don't know if they were kind of surprised by it or what, or if they didn't want to touch it, because it really wasn't their issue to deal with. So I get it. But
Right.
Experian essentially came back and said, and I actually published this on Facebook, my little Facebook
I did see
page,
that.
with their permission. I didn't do anything.
Right.
I made sure we were on the record, and so I didn't do anything nefarious. And they essentially said that through Boost, they have, first off, they cleared up a couple of things that could have festered into rumors. And one of those is that somehow FICO 8 has been adjusted so that it can consider rent. FICO 8 has not been adjusted. It was not retrofitted to consider rent, which is par for the course. The FICO doesn't retrofit their scoring models. The second thing was as well, okay, well then how does rent show up on a credit report and be considered by a model that's programmed to not consider it?
Exactly.
And so does that mean that it's being reported as an installment loan or something that is actually considered? So that was the other possible workaround on how to kind of jury rig this issue. And basically what I got back from them was that they've figured out a way to code rental trade lines that are reported only through Boost, not rental trade lines that are furnished directly from a property management company, or rental trade lines that are provided through any of these rent reporter type of subscription services where you actually pay to have your rent furnished. Right. But they essentially said that only rent through Boost has this kind of unique coding such that FICO 8 does see it and does consider it. So anyway, that's the answer to the whole question about, wait a minute, what's this issue with FICO 8 and why is it considering rent when everyone knows that FICO 9 is the first version that considered rent?
Well, that's a little light on an explanation. I mean, did they ultimately explain what it's looking at to determine the value as a trade line? Is it an installment loan in some way? And how are they going to account for the open date? Or they account, I mean, how far back are they going? Because a lot of these self-reporting rental places that you can pay, you have options like, well, we can start reporting it now. We can go back as far as 24 months. We can backdate this. How have they addressed that at all?
They did not address it. It'll be interesting to see, maybe, and actually y'all will probably see it long before I see it, because you see so many credit reports relative to the number of credit reports that I see. But it'll be interesting to see what a rental trade line through Boost looks like compared to, say, for example, the other rental trade line that you showed me, or any of the other self-reported accounts that come through Boost, like your utilities or your Netflix or things like that. That I don't know that that's going to answer the question per se, because the reports, what really matters is what it looks like in Metro 2, because that's the code, that's the language. It doesn't matter what it looks like cosmetically on some tri-bureau credit report somewhere. What really matters is what does it look like in Metro 2. Here's the and I didn't want to go down into the cornflakes about this issue with them because I wasn't going to get an answer. So there was really no point in doing it. But um, so I'm going to give a good example, and for the people watching, hopefully you'll understand this. Okay, so every single one of you drive cars, right? And before electric cars became so popular, every single one of you drove cars that were powered by gasoline. Fair enough, right? If you have a car like a pickup truck, and that pickup truck expects you to pour gasoline into the tank because the engine is built to run on gasoline, what happens if you dump water in your tank? It's still a liquid, but it's not going to run your engine. Why? Because your engine wasn't built to run off water. FICO 8 was not built to consider rent. So now we're feeding a model with information that it was never intended or programmed to see or consider. So the question is as well, if FICO wasn't involved with retrofitting their model such that they now understand what rent means, and if you've heard Julie Wooding speak at the various credit cons, and if for those of you who happened to be in a room when I was speaking, when I worked for FICO, one of the things that we have been echoing for decades is we follow the data. So why are things predictive? Or excuse me, why do things count on a credit score? Well, they count because they're predictive of some event, and that event is elevated risk and missing payments. So the question is as well, how was FICO 8 that's never been built to consider this? In other words, the engine that wasn't built to run off water, now it's being fed water to some extent. And so how is it going to react to it? That's a very deep conversation that probably wasn't going to end up with a very positive answer. And I rather than getting kind of a glossed over answer, I just kind of let it go. It's not my battle. I have no dog in this fight. All I know is that I was told that they've coded it in such a way that it does count. And if you believe the statistics in their press release, and I have no reason to not believe the statistics in the press release, that it will help your scores, pretty much the same as any other Boost trade line would help your scores.
Yeah, I think what did it say? An average of 13 points, something along those lines. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Which is great. If you're
that's substantial.
You're 13 points short of qualifying, or if you're 10 points short of qualifying, 13 points seems to get you on the correct side of it.
Yeah. Also, and again, not to keep diving into this, but one of the first thoughts I had is, okay, well, how are they gonna know if it's getting partial payments, if somebody's paying a partial payment, if they're late on their rent?
How do they know you're paying? How do they know you're paying your own rent? How do they know you're not paying the rent? So that's one of the issues with. Well, that's one of the limitations with. It's not a limitation with Boost. It's a limitation with Finicity. So Finicity is the engine that they use to go into your bank accounts, almost like Mint or Yodlee, or Plaid. These are all engines that go into bank accounts and kind of aggregate your data so that it can be used for other purposes other than balancing your checkbook. So you may see a transaction on my credit card for Netflix, but I could be paying for my daughter's Netflix account. You could see a payment in my bank account for Joe's apartment complex for $1,000 a month, but that might be my son's apartment complex and I'm paying his rent. He's not. So there's some level of imperfection with this, but it's not a Boost issue. It's really a Finicity issue. So your bank account transactions, other than just kind of telling you cash flow type of information, really doesn't provide any sort of context as to your purchase. One of the really good questions that Jim Drosky had, I know you know Jim from Chicago. One of the really good questions that Jim had was, well, you see this transaction in my bank account, and let's say it comes out on the 15th of the month. Well, what if my payment was due on the 10th of the month? Does that mean you're reporting me as how do you know that I'm actually on time versus that transaction occurring after the due date? And the answer to the question is you don't. You don't know because there are no due dates in your checking account for when you're supposed to pay your bills. So again, it's an imperfect process, and I think that there are some assumptions that are made about these transactions that if you make them X number of times reoccurring on the same day of the month, then you are making them in such a way that they are satisfying your obligation, with the caveat that that's kind of all we know about the obligation. We don't know whose obligation it is. Like, to your
Yeah.
point, if it's a partial, am I splitting rent with a roommate? So you don't really know kind of the full picture like you would, for example, a trade line
Yeah.
from American Express or Cap One.
My guess is that, because there's really two things that come to mind. Is one, I would imagine they've got some logic built into all of this that they've been testing for some time to make a decision to go with this offering, and feel pretty safe about it. But at the same time, also makes me question, what would be the rush to do, because rental is not quite like, using the example you just gave, like Netflix or something else, where, all right, it's a relatively benign, consistent, low impact bill. But rent is a different animal altogether. Like you just said, what if I'm paying a portion of my rent? What if I'm paying, what if I'm paying my son's rent or my daughter's rent? There's different factors.
That's
My
right.
question is, I wonder why, with all of those variables, I wonder why Experian felt comfortable just throwing this out there and making this available. Do you think for them it was just a matter of, okay, I think it's good enough? I mean, if we can use whatever logic we've got, it's good for maybe a 10, 13 point boost, and that's just what we're looking to do anyway, just to keep people in the brand. Do you think it might be something like that, like a marketing move?
Well, I mean, Boost is a non-revenue product, so they don't charge
No, I
anybody.
understand that,
So it
but
has to be, there has to be some other upside to it, which could be stickiness, more people
yeah,
registering
that's
for it.
really what I'm saying, is just stickiness, right? I mean,
Yeah. And
boost
remember,
the
this is a
value.
beta. So this is a beta.
Yeah,
I don't know what that means. Beta, does that mean you're going to test it and then make it available to everybody who wants to do it? Or are you going to test it and decide, nah, not really what we expected, and then so we're going to shut it off? So I mean, that's really why you have betas, and so you can
yeah,
soft launch things and decide whether or not you want to maintain them. But the thing about Boost is, if you read some of the literature of Boost, um, boosted trade lines can only help your scores. They don't lead to
right,
lower scores.
right,
If you look at some of the other trade line services, like the other one, I guess the other one that's the most comparable is Lyft, eCredible Lyft, which is
yeah, sure,
TransUnion. That's a subscription, so it's not free. You this actually is coming from the furnisher, and
right,
well, the information is actually coming from the furnisher, but you, the customer, are giving the Lyft folks permission to log into your account or get that information and see if it is in fact your account and if you are actually on time. So
right,
it's a little bit more precise. What
yeah,
it means also is that you can end up with delinquencies on your TransUnion credit report, through Lyft, which is actually what I would call a more authentic trade line, right? Because trade lines are not
yeah.
just positive only; trade lines are negative or positive. So I think from that perspective, it's a little bit more authentic. But of course, who's going to pay to have delinquent rent added to your credit reports?
Yeah, but there is that potential downside to, if you're having more of, like, for lack of a better word, like a legit reporting. I mean, you are paying for it; it is subscription based, but at least they're going to report the right stuff. Royal says, sell leads to finance companies and lenders. I think we were talking about the value of adding
Boost.
rental reporting to
That's
credit
right.
reports.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Well,
right.
that's a big business, right? I mean,
Yeah. Of course it is.
I don't know what percentage of the business that represents for credit monitoring. I mean, not credit monitoring. Excuse me. The credit bureaus, but that's how you get those offers in the mail. That's how, I don't know if it's tens of millions, hundreds of millions, but it's big business.
Well, look, this isn't what keeps the lights on at any of the credit reporting agencies, right? They're direct to consumer products. While they may be tens of millions of dollars, remember, these companies make billions of
Yeah,
dollars a year, okay, with a B. Um, it, Direct to consumer is great, but it's not what keeps the lights on at Equifax. Hasn't even done anything like this. There, you can't
yeah.
pay to have. There is no Boost at Equifax. There is no eCredible Lift at Equifax. So, I get a dollar's a dollar. Where it comes from is a matter of company strategy.
You know, I've gotten a lot of conflicting information about this over the years, and I just happened to think about this as we're talking about revenue sources for bureaus. And and by the way, I know for those watching, this is really deep in the weeds, and you might not be too interested in this stuff. So if you want to change the subject with a question, feel free. That's what we're here for. But one of the things, John, I believed early on, and then somebody debunked it, and I wasn't exactly sure if it was true or not, that there is some kind of a fee involved that bureaus charge data furnishers for an investigation process. Is there some kind of a fee that takes place? You know, if I'm, let's just say I'm, Experian, and I get a dispute, and I send ACDV that off to I don't know, Chase Bank. Is there is there are there any fees that are involved in the processing of disputes? Now, I know there's not any on the consumer end, but is there any fee somewhere at all?
There is. There's the eOscar usage fee.
Okay.
So
And for
it's
those
30.
watching, if you could do like a real quick explanation of eOscar, that would be great.
It's it's little e hyphen big Oscar, and so eOscar is the um, online solution that's an acronym. Online solution for complete and accurate reporting is what
Mm-hmm.
what the Oscar stands for. And eOscar, not to make it all complicated, and I'm sure some YouTube expert's going to try to pretend like it's something more than it really is, but eOscar is like the equivalent of a telephone line. And
Yeah.
it's how the credit bureaus communicate dispute forms to the furnishers. And after the furnishers do their investigations, they send those dispute forms with the results back to the credit bureaus over the eOscar communication protocol. That's it. You know, you can look up eOscar, but that's essentially what you're going to find that it is. All it is a communication protocol. There's
Yeah.
a license. There's a fee to use that as a furnisher. So if I'm a furnisher and I get a and I respond to it, that's 30 cents. So every single time I do that,
Got it.
30 cents, 30 cents, 30 cents. And some furnishers get bills, tens of thousands of dollars because they just get buried with these disputes. So they don't, it's not a, I hear people throw around terms like revenue and profitability. I can assure you it's not, because there's human beings that actually have to sit there on the other end of those and do the investigations, and those people are making $12 an hour, and there's probably some places have dozens and dozens of them, and
Mm-hmm.
the cost of dealing with those types of disputes um, is pretty low, and the cost to pay for eOscar is actually pretty high if you have a ton of disputes. And the credit bureaus, I think they're just kind of trying to recoup the costs of processing disputes on their
Yeah.
end, which is
Yeah.
where this 30 cents comes from. But it's not
Right.
hard to find. You can look up the eOscar if you Google something like eOscar fee or the eOscar cost. You may see articles that indicate that it's 30 cents.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's one of the things that, and we haven't got into it at all in this live, thank goodness, but we have many times in other lives, which is debunking a lot of the credit repair industry terminology. And one of the things that I haven't seen it in a little while, it's been maybe a month or two, but I still see it all the time, which is, hey, do the disputes that credit bureaus make, is it able to fool the eOscar system?
What
Just
is
like,
I
I don't
don't
know if
even
you
know.
ever, what's that?
Yeah, no, I don't even know what that means. Does
No,
what?
I know, but it's, man, you can just go into YouTube and you can find videos of people talking about how to fool eOscar, or how to fool this and trick that, and
Okay.
it's another level over what we did when we did the whole Metro 2 video with
Yeah.
Steve Rieger,
Oh yeah.
which, by the way, is still a fan favorite. Man, that thing is
Hey, is
just
that still a number one video? Yeah.
sure, yeah. If you put in
So,
Metro 2 or Metro 2 compliance, it's the first video that comes up.
so consumers don't have access to eOscar, right? The only organization that has access to eOscar is the credit bureaus, and then the companies that furnish information to the credit
Yeah,
bureaus. So that's consumers have very limited capabilities with respect to eOscar. I mean, you can mail a dispute to a credit bureau, and then the credit bureau is going to create a dispute form and then attach your dispute letter to it and then send it to a bank or a debt collector. But that's kind of the
Yeah.
limitation of your involvement with eOscar. So I don't know what there is to trick about it and why you would want to trick it. All it is a telephone line between
Yeah.
the credit bureaus and banks and debt collectors. So what does that mean? Do I need to stand in front of my Ferrari to ask this question, or I don't understand. What's the point of? I don't know. Again,
Yeah, no,
I'm befuddled.
Sometimes, and I've told this to one of our main customer service guy that's here, that he handles all the incoming tickets and the phone calls, and we don't have a ton of customer service here because it's DIY. It's pretty self-explanatory, and people tend to just figure it out pretty easily. But we do get the question to clear up what a lot of people get online, a lot of the misinformation. And one of the things that I told them early on is like, listen, customer support tickets are great. You can really get into detail with how things work. We've got videos. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I've had you do all the articles that I've had you do in all the videos, is we use those. And we include those in a lot of the tickets that we get that come into Crediversial. It's like, hey, how does this work? It's not even Crediversial related. It's just credit related. And then we follow up with education, because that's really what's lacking the most. And I told him, I said, but here's the exception. You can't really do that in a public forum like Facebook, because as soon as you tell somebody like, no, and I've done this before, and I've gone down this road, like, no, listen, it doesn't work that way. Let me explain to you how it works. And then, in fact, I had one time where I even included a video you did exactly on a great video you did on this particular subject. I've since forgotten what it is. It was re-aging is what it was. And I was explaining, no, that's not the way it works. In fact, you don't have to believe me. Here's a guy that worked at FICO and Equifax. And if you don't believe it, somebody comes from the industry, I don't know what to tell you. And man, I posted that, and just the vitriol. No, this is wrong. That's wrong. You guys are. And I told my guy here, I'm like, just don't argue with people online. It's just, you can't do it. Yeah. All right,
you're going to win 0% of the arguments, and you're going to piss off people 100% of the time.
Yeah. Okay. So stuck with one late payment, which they keep saying they can't help with taking off my credit. Well, I don't know if that's a question. Was that King Beast 247? If you want to, if there's something specific that you're asking, we're happy to answer it for you.
Except for how to get that late payment off your credit report.
Yeah, we're not going to go into specifics on how to get things deleted. But no, I mean, if the question is more like, hey, listen, I wasn't late, and I've been trying to get this thing settled, or it's identity theft. Well, it wouldn't be identity theft. It was a late payment. I mean, because that would mean somebody's been paying it. But if it's something on the up and up that you have a question, then feel free to ask it, and we will answer it. So. And we got Satoria from last week from Alabama. Welcome. Good to see you again. I think you were here last week, or maybe it was the week before, but good to see you. So, going back to, not to really examine rental reporting, but, that's one of the things that I mean, we have a couple of companies that I'm constantly getting emails from them, because they know we're, Crediversio is relatively large, have a lot of users, and they're like, hey, we got rental reporting. We have a rental reporting service, and we haven't done anything with anybody yet, because that's not really our business model. We're still working on building a DIY platform that's just going to help people to make things a little bit better in their life. So we're not really partnering with anybody per se, but because this is becoming a more and more popular subject, I mean, so much so that Experian is doing some kind of a workaround. When would you say is a good time for somebody to consider adding rental reporting? Let's take Experian Boost off the table. Let's say it's one of the products that you and I were talking about a second ago. Under what circumstances is rental reporting a great route to go, or not a great route to go?
Well, if you're going to pay someone to do it, I would say it's never worth it, because number one, you have to pay them every single month, right? So now you're kind of stuck in a subscription that you may not want for more than X number of months or need. And number two is, everything before FICO 9 can't see it. So, and right now that means all mortgage loan applications. And FICO 8 still has critical mass of users. So it's possible that you may pay to have this rent added to your credit report. And by the way, I don't think any of the rent reporting companies report to all three bureaus. I think at most some of them report to two, but I don't
Yeah.
think any of them report to all three. So
Supposedly, there's one that just finished beta with Experian, and they're the ones that blow up my email the most because we have had a couple of conversations. But I can't verify that's true. That's just what they've told me.
yeah. So I don't think that I've never been a believer that paying to have stuff on your credit report is a good long-term or
Yeah.
viable strategy. And I I don't know. I just think of the billions of people over the past X number of decades who didn't pay a penny to have information added to their credit reports and have lived long lives with good credit reports full of information and good credit scores, and were able to get loans and credit cards really without much of a problem. So I don't understand why anybody would pay to have anything added to their credit reports, including rent, especially when you have a free option now. I guess Boost is a free option,
Yeah.
and B, when everyone moves to FICO 9 and newer, then at least it's going to have more practical value
Mm-hmm.
than it has today. So I don't know. I'm open to being convinced otherwise. I'm not like anchored to this opinion. I'm just trying to think of all the reasons why it's not a good idea, and I can't balance or counterbalance it with reasons why it is a good idea.
Yeah, I think a lot of it takes place, and this is something that I'm sure I see a lot more than what you do, is just really in the credit rebuilding and coming out of a bad situation space. People are like, okay, well, yeah, I've just spent the last 2, 3, 4 years with a credit score that I'm not proud of talking about. Now, I've turned the corner. Things are a little bit better. I've vested some time into understanding how this process works. What can I do to speed up the process? So that's really, I think, the mentality, and a very understandable mentality as to why people are willing to do, pay for some of these things. I mean, there's been all kinds of products out there that not many of them are around anymore, but where you would get some kind of a subscription to like a jewelry club or something like that, and then they had this bank that would extend you an imaginary line of credit. It would pop up on your credit report for a certain period of time. But so I get the mentality behind that. Would you say that there are better methods of getting that boost, or maybe jumping a little bit faster forward on the trip to better credit than just rental reporting? I know we talked about authorized user, and that might be old hat to a lot of people that are watching this, but
Well, this is a rhetorical question. What's the value to adding rent to your credit report? I mean, what is it, other than adding something good to your credit report, which does not result in a massive increase in your score ever?
yeah,
What are you trying to accomplish, right? I mean, becoming an authorized user on a credit card or opening a new credit card, it's a possibly a new inquiry if you open your own card, a newly opened account if you're opening your own account with a new date opened, which is a time and file issue. But you also may lower your utilization ratios, and you may lower them a lot. So
yeah,
you have to kind of ask the question, well, what is adding something to your credit report? I mean, there's a simple answer to the question, right? If you're just adding an installment loan to your credit report, well, so what? I mean, what metric is that helping? There is no metric that says, 5 or more installment loans and you get 30 more
yeah,
points. That's not how it works. So
yeah.
I get it. You want to have good stuff on a credit report. I understand that, but I think the question that people need to ask before they start shelling out money to do it is well, what exactly am I dealing with? Is it just to establish a credit report? Well, guess what? Boost won't qualify your score for a score. You have to have something else. So will it get one good thing on your credit report? Yes. So again, what is the practical impact of it? They say
Yeah.
it's whatever, average 13 points or whatever, but so do it and see what that means to you. And hopefully you find a lender that uses a credit score that considers all that stuff, doesn't ask Experian to withhold boosted trade lines, because some lenders do, because they don't believe that that is a true extension of credit, because
Yeah.
it's an automated payment for a subscription like your water bill. And so again, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, a good account on my credit report always means my score is going to be better because
Yeah.
of this. It doesn't work like that. And of
Yeah.
course, look, no, you're not going to find any videos online that can explain it, because it's unexplainable, right? If you added a credit card to your credit report, there's tons of things that touches.
Yeah, for
If you
sure.
delete something from your credit report, like a charge off or a public record or a collection, that touches a bunch of things, and of course that can lead to a higher score, which is why the entire credit repair industry is built around getting things deleted, not getting things added.
Right.
Because getting things added has a very muted effect on your score. Getting things deleted generally has a more profound impact to your scores.
Certainly can, unless you delete that that 6.5 year old that charge off, that 6.5 year old on a credit card that's 20 years old, then we're talking about a different outcome altogether.
Of course.
Yeah, but and that's one thing, and that also falls into the same category as what we're talking about here, just adding something for the sake of adding something, which is, part of it feels to me like, well, if we already have Experian Boost and that can go into my bank account and it can find my, my telecom bills and then present that. If I'm looking just for something, let's just say I don't have any good credit, or I have very limited credit, and I'm trying to make some kind of some kind of headway. It seems like that the telecom part of it is probably already going to do the job. Do I really need rental reporting at the same time? Is this
Yeah.
Does this mean if I've got Netflix and I've got Verizon, and let's just say I've got Nevada Energy, that that Experian Boost is picking up? Well, what else is? How do they have to jerry rig the rental side of this boost in beta to add any benefit to me, and is it going to add any benefit at all, or did I already get it from the other things that have been boosted on my Experian credit report?
And can you do something else that has absolutely nothing to do with Boost or eCredible Lift or rent reporting or whatever, and that's going to yield more of an impact, like opening a new credit card or
Yeah.
becoming an authorized user on someone else's credit card? It seems to me that and if your end goal is to improve your scores, then there's a lot of paths to a higher score, and one of those paths could be one of the more traditional approaches. If you want to add something positive to your credit reports, it's actually very, very simple. Go out and get a secured credit card.
Yeah.
That's unless you go to one of these fee harvester companies, which you can easily avoid. Go open a secured credit card with your credit union. Give them $500. It's not like you're losing it. They keep it on deposit. And so you get a credit card with a $500 limit. Boom, you've just added a positive trade line, a legitimate trade line that's furnished by your credit union to all three of your credit reports. You have a $500 credit limit. You can use it a little bit, not a ton, but you can use it. And how is that worse than any of these other or not? How is this not as effective than having rent added to your credit reports? It's a good narrative. You pay rent. It's probably your largest payment you make every single month. You should get credit for paying your rent. I mean, it's a very compelling and it's a tear-jerking story. I get it. I understand it. But then the question from the back of the crowd from some person like me is, excuse me, how's that going to help my credit? And then crickets, right? Or you get an argument, which is even better. The minute they start arguing with you, you know that they're tapping out and they don't want to have a discussion with you. They just rather argue with you. So I think that there are more effective ways to improve credit that are cheaper and actually have a practical nature to them, like the secured card.
I wonder if this move from Experian is kind of like in the same vein as the bureaus making a decision to no longer report medical collections under certain circumstances they define. Do you think this might be just their PR response to being under a lot of pressure right now, especially with this administration and what's going on and all the talk and chatter about trying to make a nationalized credit bureau? Do you think that things like this, just adding more and more, getting more people involved in doing little things like this, like Boost, is maybe Experian's way of trying to score the unscorable, or just get more of the people who are off grid into credit reporting?
Yeah, I remember you can't use Boost to create a credit report or become scorable. So that doesn't solve that problem. That's a good question. I don't know. However, what I can tell you from my seat, anyways, is that it seems like every time the credit bureaus do something good, the CFPB still criticizes them for
Yeah,
it. And
right,
and the whole medical reporting thing is a fantastic example. When all the three of the
for
credit
sure.
bureaus, the press release about how they're gonna, whatever, not report medical collections, we're gonna delay them for a year. If they're under $500, we don't want them at all. And you thought, wow, that's who could possibly criticize that? Well, the CFPB. They came out and basically, are these guys competitors or are they a cartel? And it's like,
Right.
so it's like no good deed goes unpunished
Yeah,
with
I was just
credit
about to
bureaus.
say
You're not
that. Right.
right, and so I don't know that there was any sort of I wouldn't think that there was an expectation there was going to be some sort of a positive reaction. And of course, you get the National Consumer Law Center that hates everything just because it's fun. They hate lenders, they hate debt collectors, they hate credit bureaus, they hate everybody. And so it's almost like their job is to hate everybody. So you're not going to get any positive vibes from those folks because that's just they're wired that way. They're the National Consumer Law Center, not the kind of neutral law
Yeah.
center. So I wouldn't expect anybody to be patting Experian on the back for doing this,
Yeah,
even though it's fine. It's great that they did it, but I don't know that they did it to curry any sort of favor. But I can't speak for them. Maybe they did.
yeah. Well, I mean, the reason why I asked that question is because if we go all the way back to NCAP, especially at the second phase of NCAP, what was that, 2018, where it looked like the attorneys general were coming down on the bureaus about judgments and tax liens, and they did the same thing. They like preemptively decided to, like, okay, well, we're not going to report tax liens and judgments anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of the same thing. It felt like they did that to curry a little bit of favor, because it looked like they were about to get into some kind of battle, whether it was a legitimate battle or not. But they headed that one off at the pass, and again, it did benefit clients or the end user. I'm not going to say it benefited the lenders at all, because like you and I have discussed in the past, well, now we don't have. I mean, we can see judgments elsewhere, we can see tax liens elsewhere, but they're not on the credit report anymore.
Right.
We got a question from Jay here. Hey, Dave and John, a couple of quick questions. TransUnion has coded child support on my credit file as a bankruptcy. It caused me to miss out on huge funding for my business. Do they have to remove it? And he says he never filed bankruptcy. So the only place I can imagine that would be in the note section, where it would say included in bankruptcy, or part of, or maybe, John, in the payment status section, included in BK. But that is very bizarre.
Yeah. So the child support's a trade line, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
child support enforcement, I guess, agencies. I don't know if that's the proper terminology, but because I've never paid child support, thankfully. That's not actually true.
I was going to
Um,
say, you're paying for
I
that
guess,
all the
yeah,
time. You're just not being
I guess you
made
have
by the
kids. You're all
state.
technically paying child support, but not in the sense of child support
Right.
agencies.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, so child support is a trade line, just like your credit card is a trade line, just like your auto loan is a trade line. And there are guidelines on how to report those trade lines, like there are guidelines on how to report mortgages and auto loans. So having said that, um, to report something in bankruptcy, there's a code in Metro 2 called the Consumer Information Indicator Code, or the CII code, and that is the only method that can be used by a furnisher or a credit bureau to indicate that a trade line, or excuse me, a debt is associated with bankruptcy. I'm not sure you can include child support in a bankruptcy. I mean, that may be wrong, but I don't know that you can discharge child support obligations in a bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So if you have a TransUnion credit report, and that TransUnion credit report includes child support, and that child support trade line indicates that it's associated with bankruptcy, and you've never filed for bankruptcy, that means you don't have a bankruptcy filing. The actual record, the public record, is not on any of your credit reports. And you've disputed it with TransUnion, and you've disputed it with the child support enforcement, so the furnisher, and none of them are willing to fix it, you've got a pretty good FCRA claim in the palm of your hand right there. Bankruptcy is actually there. I mean, furnishers use services to, like, there's Banco through LexisNexis, which is a really common one. And what Banco is essentially you can scrub your customer database against the Banco database, and anytime someone files for bankruptcy, obviously it's in the LexisNexis system because they're a public records vendor, and that's how lenders know not to touch debts any longer if they're associated with bankruptcy. But again, I don't know that child support is even subject to that. But clearly, if they're furnishing something that indicates that the debt is associated with bankruptcy and it's not, and they're not willing to correct it, then you've got a pretty good FCRA claim. And if it is, I see the rest of your message, Jay, that you're being so miss out. I don't know what that means. Does that mean you applied for it and you were denied because of it, or you're just not going to apply for it because you think you might be denied? If you think that it's causing you to not be able to get some sort of funding, you probably should at the very least apply for it. So then there's a record of the application and then a record of the denial, which would likely indicate that it's because of a bankruptcy on your personal credit report that you've never filed for. So that's the best way to go about memorializing that versus just saying, well, I missed out on it because I didn't think I would qualify. That's a little bit different than actually doing it and being denied because of it.
Yeah, Jay, if you're still watching, do this for me, because the names that we see on YouTube and Facebook aren't always the names that correspond in Crediversio, and I'm making an assumption that you have a Crediversio account. If you do, send me an email. It's davidm@crediversio.com. I'll take a look at it for you, because I haven't seen that before. I haven't seen a bankruptcy notation on an account where there's no bankruptcy on the account. It's on in the file itself. Let's see here. In the public records section, when I applied for loan officer, it said it's coded as a bankruptcy, so I was turned down for $10,000. All right, Jay.
Yeah.
So
you should have the letter. Keep that letter.
Yeah, for sure. So Jay, email me, davidm@crediversio.com. I want to look at this myself. And okay. All right, okay. So you don't have Crediversio, not a problem. If you just email me, and if you want to do a screenshot or something of that account, I'll take a look at it for you. Let's see. Okay, Chris, why don't we finish up with this last question from Chris?
Okay.
Looks like there's some blank spaces in here, but we'll do our best. So, how can a credit card account stay on all 3 credit reports after 10 years, but when I dispute the account, they are saying no account found?
So Chris, if it's in good standing, there's no requirement to remove it ever. Obviously, if it was a default, or if it was charged off or included in bankruptcy or some sort of terminal delinquency associated with it, then it does have to be removed. And obviously, we all know it has to be removed before 7 years. And so, to the extent that you're challenging, if you're seeing it on a credit report, then obviously it's there. If the dispute that you're filing results in a dispute being sent through eOscar, which we talked about earlier, to the furnishing party, and the furnishing party comes back and tells the credit bureaus, we have no record of this, the credit bureaus will remove it because they can't maintain information that's not verifiable. So all of these things, something doesn't necessarily sound it doesn't sound like you're getting the straight answer, because obviously if it's on a
Yeah.
credit report, then there is record of it because it's there. To the extent that the furnisher has no record of it in their system, then the credit bureau should remove it because it's not verifiable. And that's another provision in the FCRA, is that all the stuff on your credit report has to be verifiable, not just accurate, but also verifiable. But I want to caution you. This is one of the ones that David and I talked about earlier about how can you backfire. You know, if it's in good standing, leave it alone, right? Because if it's a credit card that's over 10 years old, that's actually probably helping your score because of the age of the account. If it's terminally delinquent, or if it went into default, then it should have been gone years ago, and obviously you should dispute it to get it corrected. And if, again, just like I told Jay a few minutes ago, if what you're telling me is exactly how your comment reads and no one's willing to correct it, memorialize everything you possibly can, and you've got a good FCRA claim in your hands.
Excellent. All right, that brings us to a close. 50 minutes. That flew by again.
Yeah.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining me and John today. John, thank you so much for answering the questions. Everybody asked some great questions today. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. And we will see you next Wednesday here at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much. Take care.
They are. Thank you very much.